What's going on, football fans? It's your boy Gsluke here with our DFS and prop preview for Thursday night football between the Bills and the Texans. Gonna get you guys ready for all of your exposure. But first off, a breakdown of the Draftkings side and what we're doing for our single game lineups. That include a review of the game environment, some of the injuries that we have before lock, also some of my favorite plays across the board, both at flex and at captain. And then afterwards, we're gonna focus on the prop and the betting side of things with a few props that have already entered for Thursday night's game. You might want to consider adding it for yourself. That'll be on Underdog and Prize Picks, where you guys can find some of those leans. And without further ado, we've got a lot to go through here together. Let's get this thing going. Starting with the game environment, first off, we have a pretty middling total. It's in the mid-40s depending on which sportsbook you're looking at, but maybe more importantly, we have the Bills as 6-point favorites. And anytime a spread gets close to a touchdown favoring one team over the other, you see a lot of ownership bias towards that team. And with the higher implied team total, the projections are going to be higher on them as well. So beforehand, just know that you're going to see more 4-2 Bills lineups than 4-2 Texans lineups. Still quite a few 3-3s. That is the most common build that we have for these large field GPPs. But if you're looking to favor one side or the other, the field is going to be doing that with Buffalo. So if you're playing in the large field GPPs, anything over 10,000 plus entries, you might want to consider playing a Texans-led lineup in one of those kind of contests. But if you're playing in cash with single entries, I do agree with that 6-point spread. I think Buffalo, even on the road, probably should be favored here. They've got the MVP candidate at quarterback. Both defenses are pretty stout. Maybe the Texans the better of the two bunches, but they've got Davis Mills playing quarterback. They don't have CJ Stroud leading the mix there. I think that's the real big difference and X factor between these two teams. So just know that the field is going to be biasing towards that, and because I tend to agree with that game script, I'm going to be playing at some smaller field GPPs, contests where I'm not going to be duplicating myself with nearly as many people. If I leave $500, maybe $1,000 on the table, mix in 1 to 2 differentiated pieces, I might even have a unique build in that sort of a format. So that's what I'm personally going to do. A lot of 4-2s for me, and some 3-3s mixing in there as well. But let's start off with Josh Allen at the top end of the board, who is $12,400. Extremely expensive, but considering that he's still holding a 1.8x points per dollar projection, he's a borderline lock on a slate like this. In fact, I'm not going to have many lineups at all that don't have him in there, so I'm going to be finding the salary with one of my few other spots to make it work. And even at captain, where he's $18,600, I think he's worthy of playing there as well. And he is a quarterback that has a lot of rushing upside, so you don't have to have him with a pass catching option every single time. But because this isn't a main slate where we've got 10 to 12 games to choose from, where a quarterback can get there naked a whole lot more often, you've only got one game and one set of skill position players to get to the optimal. He's more than likely going to bring at least one pass catching option along with him if he's posting the 20 plus points that he needs. So stack him up with a pass catcher in 99% of the lineups that you're building, but I will throw that naked build out there just in case he runs in 3 rushing touchdowns again. And the other thing to know is that the ownership's going to be there. He's the highest owned player that we have on the slate. So even though I do think he's a borderline lock and a free square on a slate like this, you're going to have to get differentiation elsewhere. He's not going to accomplish that whatsoever in your sort of build, even if you go with 100% in your exposure. Next up, we got a James Cook III, who is also over $11,000 and only a 1.4x points per dollar value here. So the ownership drops off quite a bit, but because people like spending all of their salary in Showdown, he's still over 50% combined ownership. So in my opinion, he's not one of the better plays that we have on the slate. In fact, in my single entries, some of my smaller field GPPs, I'm not going to be prioritizing him nearly as much, but because he is a rushing first running back, and if Buffalo is playing from 1 or 2 touchdowns ahead, he's going to get so much extra second half usage. He has to be a part of your player pool, especially if you're building anything that's heavy towards Buffalo. So that's more so where I'm going to be deploying them. I think the large field GPPs is the kind of format where you'd want to use them, where you can give you a little bit of differentiation compared to maybe a Davis Mills or a Josh Allen up there at the top. And at the captain position, rather than being nearly 30% at that captain position, he's only 12% owned. So I think that that's my favorite spot to use him, is in a large field GPP and then at that captain position. And when I'm using him at captain, you guys can see in this script dependent tab towards the right, I'm only going to be using them in 4-2 or 5-1 Buffalo builds. So in the kind of game environments, the kind of scenarios where he'll see that extra second half usage is where I'll be deploying them in those sort of contests. Next up, we got a Nico Collins at $11,200, even more expensive than he should be at 1.3x points per dollar value, but still has a lot of GPP upside because, like a James Cook, he's got big play written all over him, even more so at that wide receiver position, and he likely needs 100 plus receiving yards or maybe even a touchdown touchdown or two to be that optimal captain, but he's only 11% owned at that spot. And even if you're playing a 4-2 Buffalo lineup, where you're going with Nico Collins at captain on the other side, and then maybe pairing him up with Davis Mills, that could get there if Collins is doing that from the buyback. Let's assume that Buffalo's getting the lead, maybe rushing the ball in the second half, spreading it around a little bit more than what we have on the Texans, and then the Texans playing from a touchdown or two behind in the second half are going with a whole lot of Mills to Collins and maybe getting 100 plus yards and a touchdown. That could be how he's the optimal captain, even with only 2 players in the Texans in the optimal lineup and 4 players from Buffalo on the other side. So I think at large field GPPs, that could be a way to play the Buffalo a little bit heavier than what we have on the Texans side in a slightly more differentiated fashion. So just one of the very many creative ways that you can go out there and try and get a slightly more unique lineup. Next up, we got Davis Mills at $9,600, so quite a big drop off in price tag from player to player. In fact, $1,600 from Collins to Mills, and that puts them at 1.6x points per dollar value. And the thing with these quarterbacks that makes them even better plays for cash, that's single entries, is that they have higher floors compared to some of the other players around them. I mean, Mills has at least a 10-point fantasy floor. Josh Allen's in that 15 to even 16 fantasy floor range because of the kind of rushing upside that he brings to the table. But Davis Mills here is somebody that even in a Buffalo heavy stack, or maybe you're using a James Cook at captain and then 3 other players from Buffalo, you could go Mills at flex, throw him in there with one of his pass catching options that's super cheap towards the bottom end of the board, and make that the buyback that you're going with. But unfortunately, I do think that will be the most popular way that people play the Buffalo heavy lineups. So you might want to avoid that in the large field GPPs. If that's your MO, maybe leave a little bit of extra salary on the table, because I think that's going to be by far the most popular set of 2 players that people use to this 4-2 Buffalo lineups. Next up, we got a Woody Marks here at $9,200. He's been priced up for the expected increase in his workload, but last week he went from an 80% snap share 2 weeks ago to only about 63% last week. So it was a drop off actually in his production level, and the price tag has steadily gone up over the last couple weeks. And although he did get a lot of touches in the 63% of snaps that he was playing, a lot of that had to do with the game environment and the game script that they were playing in, playing from way ahead against the Titans. This game script is not going to be as favorable though. They are 6-point underdogs against Buffalo, not expected to be playing from ahead the entire time, and he's also a little bit more expensive than he should be. So he's only a 1.4x points per dollar value, and that's keeping the ownership in check, because if he had been $7,500 or $7,000, God forbid, he'd probably be 70 to 80% owned with the kind of workload that he's expecting. So good on DraftKings and getting ahead of it, trying to price him up for the occasion. But in this sort of a matchup against, one of the better defenses that we have in the NFL, not so much against the run, they're a better pass defense than they are a rushing defense, but still 6-point underdogs means that he's not going to get as many touches as what we're likely hoping for. Makes him more of a large field GPP option than anything. Next up, we got a Khalil Shakir at $8,000. That's another $1,200 drop off in the price tag, so always worth noting when there's that big of a gap from player to player. The reason why that's important is that when people are leaving salary on the table, they oftentimes end up on the same player when that's the case. When you have a whole $12,000 gap or $1,200 gap, you're going to leave $700 to $1,000 on the table. No matter how much you leave, even if it's $700 as opposed to $1,200 that you're leaving on the table, oftentimes you're still finishing it off with the same sort of player. So when you have these big gaps, this isn't something I always share or really talk about, as it's a pretty big edge, and I'm kind of kicking myself that I'm even going down this avenue right now, is to go down one extra player. And I think the best example of this would actually be the next gap that we have, which goes from Shakir down to Don Schultz, is there's going to be that same kind of thing going on here where there's $1,600 gap here. No matter how much salary you're leaving on the table, you're pretty much getting to the same kind of player if you just go a few more players past it, right? Maybe, rather than taking a Coleman, you go down to a Prater or a Fairman as the player that you're using as that last man in, leaving a little bit of extra salary on the table, but just going past that massive gap in the salary. It's going to give you a better chance at being unique in the large field GPPs, and we'll leave it there before I give away too much. But that is something that you'll see with, the kind of combinations that are actually played in large field GPPs. It doesn't have to do with the product ownership or the cumulative ownership, but more so with pricing dynamics, right? People like to spend all of their salary. If they're going to leave some salary on the table, they're oftentimes going to be left on the same sort of players. Shakir, though, was expected to get a lot of extra work last week after Coleman was a healthy scratch. That did not happen. He was somebody that got less usage last week than he's ever seen for the entire year. It's been more so like the tertiary wide receivers that went off. It was your Shavers, some of the other third, fourth string wide receivers that went for 50 plus yards, but expect that to change this time around. He's the PPR is probably their best route runner that they have on the team. And I think the reason why those other guys shined is all the extra attention that Shakir was getting last week. Dalton Schultz is my favorite mid-tier play by far on this slate. He's got a 1.5x points per dollar value and has shown a lot of chemistry with Davis Mills over the last few weeks. He's had 5, 6, 7 catches over the last 3 games. He's been targeted the second most of the team, just behind Nico Collins, and it hasn't been a massive target gap between those two players. So give me him at $6,400. I think it's a more than fair price tag, and only 35% combined ownership was surprising to me when I saw that. When I ran my ownership algorithm, I was adjusting it for some of the public sentiment that we've already seen this week. I have him at a lot lower ownership than what I was expecting to see there. So maybe it does steam up as we get closer to lock. Of course, guys, if you guys want to download this sheet with all my up-to-date projections, my entire player pool completely uncensored towards the right side, make sure to check out the NFL DFS tier on my Patreon. I'll put a link to the description of the video to go out there and get there. Again, NFL DFS tier is how you get access to this. But if he's going to stay in that 35 to 40% range by the time that we get to lock tomorrow, then I'm going to be thrilled to throw him into, I don't know, 60, 65% of my lineups and get some solid leverage on that spot. Keon Coleman was a healthy scratch the last time out. He is $5,400. We'll have to see if he's active or not. I would imagine that he's going to be active, that it was probably just a one-game punishment. If not, then his future on Buffalo Bills is probably in question. So we'll have to see if we get any news on that over the next day or so, whether he's going to be playing or not. If not, there's going to be some wide receiver value to be had on Buffalo. If he plays, I imagine that he's not going to get much ownership. In fact, I've got him playing as of right now, maybe not his full snap load at only 6.5 raw point projection, but I've got him sub 15% owned. And the thing is about Coleman, he's not a volume wide receiver. He's somebody that's a high pointer of the ball. He's a big-bodied, physical wide receiver. Sometimes can go for a yak touchdown as well. He's big player bust. So he's already a GPP option that I'm really only playing in the large field contest to begin with, but especially in this sort of scenario. So if he's going to be low owned, I actually think there's some upside to be had there. Next up, we got these two kickers, Matt Prater, Akaimi Fairbairn at $5,000. Fairbairn's at 1.5 field goals on books, and he has juiced pretty heavily towards the over. So he's holding his own with this projection, even though his point after touchdown equity might not be as high as a Matt Prater on the Buffalo side. He's still got a 7.8 point projection. And in fact, out of the two kickers is the better projection in terms of points per dollar value and has the higher ownership out of the two. We've also got the Bills defense here at $4,800. They're only a 1.5x points per dollar value, but you don't play a defense for their median projection. You play it for some of the fringe outcomes when they get a defensive or special teams touchdown, when they're able to post 4 to 5 sacks or a couple fumbles or interceptions on that side of the ball, and to get to 12 to 15 points. And because we have two elite defenses going at it, it could be a bit of a slow slog. That's the way that I expect this game to kind of come to fruition. A Bills defense is a really good way to play the favorites, play the side that has the higher implied team total, like I want to Thursday, and do it in a slightly more differentiated fashion. So for example, going with a Cook at captain, pairing up a Bills defense alongside with it, you're getting correlation in those sort of builds and a little bit of differentiation, because like we mentioned before, Cook's only like 12% at captain as opposed to 30% for Josh Allen at that position. And then you mix in, somebody that's closer to 22, 23% at the flex spot, leave $500 to $1,500 on the table, and that is the recipe for getting something unique. Next up, we got a Jane Higgins here at $4,600. He was in the wide receiver 2/4 range for the Houston, and we're going to say wide receiver 2/4 because the next few wide receivers that we mentioned for Houston all played between 50 to 60% of the snaps. So it's pretty much a toss-up between who's actually the wide receiver 2 on that team. But it does mean that in the large field GPPs, they've got a lot of options to choose from. And some of the ones that are a little bit lower owned, like we have here with Higgins, that is only about 12.8% at the flex spot, could give you a lot of leverage in the large field GPPs. In fact, even if you play a Buffalo heavy lineup and have some of the more chalky players on that side of things, you throw in a Higgins like this, you leave $1,000 on the table, and that might be enough to make sure that you're not duplicated a whole bunch of different times. Speaking of that, the Texans defense is only 16.2% at the flex spot in the low scoring game, and as one of the better units that we have in the NFL, I don't think you can sleep on them at $4,400. I'm not 100% sure yet whether I'm going to play any Texans led lineups in the GPPs. I think I probably should, because it's only a 6-point spread. I don't think it's an absolute certainty that Buffalo Buffalo's going to win the game. I do think they do more often than not, but in the case that we get something wacky and maybe the Texans really show out on that defensive side of the ball, it wouldn't be a bad idea to try and take some Woody Marks exposure and pair it up with some defense on the Texans side. So just like we had with the Bills, all of that can be applied over there. Just maybe a slightly lower percentage outcome because of the fact that they are touchdown underdogs. Next up, we got a Josh Palmer here at $4,200. He was the wide receiver 2 for them last week. He played the second most snaps that they had on the team. So if Coleman's out, that would be another player that gets a boost because of that. Dalton Kincaid is already out for Buffalo. Also, a Curtis Samuel has already been rolled out for Buffalo. So a couple pieces of injury news that were noteworthy there. On the Texans side, pretty much everyone's healthy at the skill position players, so not as much impact there. But Dawson Knox, as tight end 1 for Buffalo, is projecting pretty solid at 1.6x points per dollar value. But he's getting ownership. He is about 20% combined ownership between the flex and the captain spot. But considering that he's tight end 1 and he's only $4,000, I would have thought that he would have been closer to 30% owned. So he's another player that we'll have to see if he steams up as we get closer to lock, as I would think that he probably should steam up at that sort of a projection and at this sort of a price tag. But if not, I'm going to be playing him in 35 to 40% of my lineups, and I'm going to be thrilled to do so. And next up, we got Gabe Davis, who was active for the first time in all of 2025. He's back in Buffalo. He has a lot of chemistry with Josh Allen that they built up over the years. And even in his first week back, he got a few targets. So he's $3,800. He's a lot more expensive than he should be, but we know Gabe Davis is a big play waiting to happen, a big play red zone wide receiver that can catch touchdowns. You play him in large field GPPs because of that. So you wouldn't touch him with a 10-foot pole in cash/single entry. It's just not the right format to do so. Large field GPPs, maybe he's a 5 to 10%er that you hope you can catch a little bit of lightning in a bottle there. Next up, we got Ty Johnson, who's the receiving running back for Buffalo. He's played a lot over the last month or so, a lot more than he probably should. I think James Cook's an all-world back, so I have no idea why they're mixing in guys like Ray Davis and Ty Johnson nearly as much as they are, but they are. That's what they're choosing to do with the offense in Buffalo, and as a result, he's got a 4 raw point projection. Not a whole lot of ownership behind him, but let's say that there's an injury to Cook. That could be Johnson's way to the optimal lineup. He's the balanced back that they have, so if there was an injury, he would be running back 1 for them. Ray Davis would see a huge increase in usage as well. He's more of that bruising between the tackles kind of running back, but because Ty Johnson can block, and also because he's got that receiving upside, he'd probably play 65 to 70% of the snaps. So is at least throwing out there in case we do get an injury at the running back position, but that or maybe a red zone touchdown is his only way to the optimal. Next up, we got a Nick Chubb, who's the running back 2 for Houston. He sees a lot more snaps than we have with Johnson. He plays actually 35 to even 45% of the snaps every single week for the Texans. Over the last couple weeks, in fact, 2 weeks ago, he saw his lowest snap share at about 20% as opposed to 80% for Woody Marks. I think as the year goes on, maybe it does look more like that, where it's 80-20 between those two players, but he is viable, especially as the more bruising running back between the two, as he could score when they get within the 5-yard line. He's only about 12.5% owned at flex, so it's not like he's going completely overlooked down here, but if you're playing anything that's more Texans heavy and you're expecting them to run the ball a whole bunch, Nick Chubb would be a prime beneficiary of that, so should probably be in consideration for those 4-2 or 5-1 Houston builds. We got Xavier Hutchinson here as well. He's one of those wide receiver 2/4s for the Texans. Again, there's not really a wide receiver 2 on their team. He played about 55% of snaps, and he's $3,000. Not my favorite play at only 1.5x points per dollar value, though. Next up, we got Christian Kirk, another one of those wide receiver 2-4s. He also played about 50% of snaps last week, and he's played a lot of snaps over the last couple of games, but he hasn't done jack shit with it. I think he had like 1 catch for 4 yards, 1 catch for 7 yards, something along those lines over the last couple games, but he's played the snap share of all these other wide receivers. It just hasn't gotten the same kind of looks because of it. So if you're a box score watcher, if you're somebody that's not doing your due diligence on the kind of snaps that these players on the Texans are playing, you probably think Christian Kirk's a bench warmer at this point, and that is just not the case. There's a chance that he could get 3, even 4 targets on a game like this, maybe take one into the end zone and crack open the slate at $2,800. So I would say that of the Texans wide receivers, that he's probably my favorite. It's not so much that he's grading out the best with the analytics. He's not. It's more so that I think he's going to be underrated because of some of the box score watchers. Next up, we got a Terrell Shavers. He was somebody that went off last week with Keon Coleman sitting. King, he's $2,400. If Coleman's out again, he'll be one of the best values that we have on the slate down low. Jackson Hawes will be tight end 2 for Buffalo. He played even before he had the Kincaid injury, so he's playing even more now that he's out there in the number 2 spot. Jalen Noel will be the 5th wide receiver for Houston. He only played 26% of snaps last week, so he is going to be the one that's on the bench the most, but is a big play wide receiver, is the speediest of all the ones that they have. So if anyone's going to go for like a 60, 70-yard touchdown, it's probably him, even in a smaller sample size. Here's Ray Davis, $1,400. We mentioned that he sees the field as the more bruising back. Unfortunately, he needs a touchdown or an injury to get there, so he's only a GPP flyer in those sort of formats. You have a Cade Stover next. He's $600. That's half the reason that you'd want to play him. We've got some guys that are over 11 grand that are very playable, so having guys down here that are costing you next to nothing are extremely useful on a slate like this. He is the tight end too, though, so he will see some snaps, but as more of a blocker, he's going to have to turn that into a touchdown to get there in most cases. Maybe he could get there with like 3 catches for 30 yards, but even that is asking a lot from Stover if you take a look at his career track record. Daria Bungawale, he's more of a receiving back for Houston. He is their 3rd running back, so unless there's some injuries, he's probably not going to play as much as what we need to. You've got Alatu at tight end. He's the 3rd tight end for Buffalo. He got his first catch of the season last time out, and it's hardly played whatsoever, so GPP only play, and even then is probably a donation. And then you got Reggie Gilliam towards the bottom. He's a blocking specialist for that Buffalo offense. Not even sure whether to call him a tight end or a fullback. He kind of goes all over the place and plays all kinds of different positions for that team, but a blocking first kind of player that will really only get there with a short red zone touchdown. So it would be nice to have a whole lot of punts, to play a Josh Allen captain, to mix in an Allen and Cook lineups together, but we don't really have it. Mostly in the GPPs, we have a few guys we can mix in into like 5, maybe 15% of lineups, but in cash/single entries, I do like the more balanced build a little bit more. So that will mean avoiding guys like Josh Allen or Cook at captain in a lot of those, going to a more affordable player like maybe a Collins or a Davis Mills at that spot, and spreading out my salary. That's just how I personally want to play the slate. And now for the prop and betting side, where I've got a couple leans you might want to consider tailing for Thursday. This is going to be a correlated script with anything that is Buffalo led. If they get a 1 to 2 touchdown lead, we're going to get a boost on both of these kind of spots. And considering that it pays a full 3x and we're getting some line value in both cases, well worth mixing in on a pick'em site like Prize Picks. So let's start with the Josh Allen lean at a 30.5 passing attempts, and we're going to be playing the under, which with a 6 and 7 point lead, that's going to be leading to less passing usage for Josh Allen in the second half, and he's already gone under this line in about 60% of games this year. So it's not like he's gone under 70, 80% or anything like that, but with the tough defensive matchup, I don't think they're going to mess around in the second half. If they do get a lead with the kind of pass rushers that you have on the Texans, kind of takeaways that they've already forced this year, there's no reason to risk it with downfield passes. I would expect to see a lot of James Cook, maybe even some extra Ray Davis usage in that second half to really protect that football, which is why I'm liking this sort of an under. And if you take a look at the sports books, he's minus 120 to minus 135 for the under at this sort of number. Depends on which sports book you're looking at. And as we get closer to lock, it'll probably be closer to minus 130 average odds by the time we get to Thursday. And that's a bit speculative, but with the kind of defensive matchup that we have here with some of the betting cards I've already seen on this sort of a lean, I think it makes a whole lot of sense. So we'll mix it in there at 30.5 before any of that potential line movement. And then on the other side, we've got this under at 15.5 rushing attempts on Woody Marks. And the reason why he's even at 15.5 rushing attempts is because it's a quote unquote good defensive matchup against the Bills. Now on paper it is, they allow a lot of fantasy points to opposing running backs, but that depends on the game script. If Buffalo is going to be playing from a touchdown or two ahead, you do have a backup quarterback playing quarterback for Houston, then that's going to lead to less rushing usage for them as a whole. And, he had 18 rushing attempts last week. Another reason why he's all the way up here at 15.5, but that was against maybe the worst team in the NFL, the Tennessee Titans, where they were playing from ahead the entire time. They had a reason to try and run out the clock. And Nick Chubb, he's likely going to see the field as well. So even if we do get 20 running back touches for the Texans side of things, because Chubb's going to see probably 6 or 7 of those running back touches, I don't see Marks going over this sort of number. And there's a book that has him at minus 130 over, but most of the other ones have him at minus 125 to minus 130 and the other direction towards the under, which is plus EV value here. I guess the sports books aren't really in agreement with what they expect here, but with Chubb at a 5.5 rushing attempt line, do we really think Houston's going to run the ball? over 20, 21 times as underdogs, I think that that's a stretch, especially even with a relatively soft defensive matchup. So I'm going to take that under, and if we get that kind of game script that I'm hoping for, where Buffalo is playing from ahead, Marks isn't going to get the second half usage. Josh Allen's not going to have to throw the ball as much. And also, if it's a slower paced game, more of a slog like I'm expecting to, because we have two good defensive units that are going at it, I don't think it's, a stretch to say that maybe we see less offensive plays in this kind of a game. So you're getting 3x on this, even with the correlation in multiple spots. And it's multiple types of correlation that we're mixing in here as well. So that's the sweet spot, is when we can find game scripts that make a lot of sense and plus EV value on top of that. So this is just one example of the kind of props that I'll be entering for Thursday Night Football. If you guys want to tell every piece of exposure as I enter it, make sure to check out the NFL prop tier on my Patreon page. There will be a link down below to access that as well. $15 a month gives you access to every single slip that I'm entering as soon as they're entered onto the sportsbook, so that you can catch them before any potential line movement. It's still early on a Wednesday here, so I have no idea what's going to happen with both of these lines, but there's a chance when we get closer to Thursday, and when a lot of you guys are watching this video, these lines aren't even available anymore. That's kind of the point with us entering a lot of these props, is to try and catch that line value before it moves. And if you want to catch every single slip that I'm entering for the slate, you guys can find that on the Patreon page. But that's all I've got here for the prop side. Alrighty guys, that's all for the Thursday Night Football preview. Go ahead, smash that like button if you haven't already. Also subscribe to the channel so you guys don't miss any of the content to come. And comment down below who you got as the top scorer for the Thursday Night Football slate for a chance to earn a free month of my Patreon names. As long as you guys give me the top scorer first, it'll be on a first come, first served basis. You win a free month access to everything on my Patreon, including the DFS projection sheet that you saw before with all the up-to-date projections, also my entire player pool for DFS, and all the Underdog and Prize Picks props that I'm entering on the pick'em side of things. All of that just by guessing that top scorer. So go ahead, claim your player before anyone steals him from you. Best of luck with that, and also with all the exposure that you're going with. I hope to see a lot of your names towards the top end of the GPPs. Let's go out there and cash out on our prop exposure as well and add a bit to the bankroll. But other than that, best of luck. I appreciate your support on the channel as per usual, guys. And I'll see you guys for the main slate preview a little bit later on this week.